War is one of humanity's oldest companions. Long before nations were carved, before flags were raised, before treaties were signed, human beings fought. They fought over food, over survival, over honor, over the meaning of life itself. And though we would like to think of war as an aberration, a sickness that interrupts the natural flow of peace, the truth is more unsettling. War is not the opposite of human nature, but a reflection of it. The psychology of war forces us to ask, why must human beings fight? Is it necessity or is it choice? Is it survival or is it desire? The answer is complex, woven from instincts, culture, and meaning. War is not simply a political event, it is an existential one. It is born not only from the clash of armies but from the inner conflicts of the human soul. We fight because we are creatures of scarcity. Where there is lack, there is competition. Where there is competition, there is struggle. But we also fight because we are creatures of imagination. We construct identities, nations, religions, ideals, and then defend them as if they were extensions of our own flesh. War, in this sense, is not only about resources but about meaning. At its core, war reveals a paradox. Humanity yearns for peace, yet we often find purpose in struggle. The soldier on the battlefield may discover in combat a sense of unity, clarity, and even transcendence that daily life with its trivialities cannot provide. War strips existence down to its essentials: life, death, loyalty, courage, fear. It is a furnace in which both destruction and transformation occur. This is why war cannot be understood as mere madness. It is instead the outer manifestation of the inner tensions that govern human beings, between survival and transcendence, aggression and cooperation, fear and courage, death and meaning. To understand war is to understand ourselves, for in its flames we see both the noblest and the darkest aspects of human nature. The challenge, then, is not to deny that humans have to fight, but to ask what we choose to fight for. If struggle is inevitable, then the task of wisdom is to elevate our battles beyond destruction, to fight not merely against others, but against ignorance, injustice, and despair. War will always be part of us, but what kind of war we wage defines the quality of our civilization and the depth of our humanity. War is not some strange visitor that occasionally intrudes upon the human story. It is woven into the very fabric of our existence, reflecting back to us what we often try to hide, the conflicts that already live within us. To believe that war is simply the result of bad leaders, corrupt governments, or unfortunate historical accidents is to miss the deeper truth. Human beings carry within themselves the seeds of war, for the battlefield is first born in the psyche. The outward clash of armies mirrors the inward clash of impulses between creation and destruction, love and hate, self-preservation and self-transcendence. Psychology teaches us that aggression is not an aberration, but a part of the instinctual core of the human being. Just as we are capable of nurturing, we are capable of wounding. Just as we seek harmony, we also generate conflict. Freud once spoke of the death drive, the instinct to return to stillness, to undo life itself, and this drive, in tension with the instinct for preservation, creates the conditions for violence. In this sense, war is not simply an external event, but the collective eruption of forces that exist in each individual. When we see nations collide, we are really witnessing the projection of inner contradictions onto the world stage. The myth of a purely peaceful human nature collapses under the weight of history. From the tribal conflicts of our ancestors to the global wars of modernity, human beings have repeatedly demonstrated that struggle is not an occasional lapse, but a persistent companion. Even in times of peace, the language of war permeates our lives. We speak of fighting illness, battling poverty, waging wars on injustice. The metaphor itself reveals the underlying truth. We are creatures who instinctively frame existence in terms of struggle. Yet to acknowledge that war reflects human nature is not to excuse it. It is to understand it, Denial blinds us, but understanding grants us power. If war arises from within, then the responsibility for peace also begins within. We cannot hope to end conflict if we ignore the forces of aggression, fear, and desire that live in the human heart. The work of peace is not only political negotiation but also psychological integration. It is the recognition and transformation of the war within us. This is why war so often feels inevitable. It emerges whenever inner contradictions find no other path of resolution. When nations repress their shadow aspects, greed, envy, fear, they eventually externalize them onto others. The enemy becomes a vessel for what we cannot face in ourselves. What begins as inner turmoil becomes geopolitical conflict. Thus, every war is both a historical event and a symbolic drama, revealing humanity's inability to reconcile its own divided nature. If we are to grasp why humans fight, we must first look inward. War is not merely out there, in some distant battlefield. It is a mirror held up to the human soul. Until we understand that the conflict outside reflects the conflict within, we will remain fated to repeat the same cycle, unable to break free from the oldest story humanity knows. Scarcity has always been one of the deepest engines of human conflict. Long before the complex ideologies of modern warfare, human beings fought simply because they had to. Food, land, water, and shelter, these were the first battlegrounds, the primal necessities upon which survival depended. Where resources were scarce, struggle was inevitable, and where struggle occurred, conflict often escalated into violence. War, in this sense, is not an invention of civilization, but a continuation of the oldest biological law: compete or perish. Psychology and anthropology both point to this primal root. Human beings, like all creatures, carry within themselves the instinct to preserve life at any cost. The need to protect one's kin, tribe, or community fuels aggression when threats appear. It is not malice alone that drives us into battle, but the fundamental urgency of survival. Scarcity sharpens this instinct. When survival is threatened, cooperation collapses, and suspicion takes its place. Those who were once neighbors become rivals and eventually enemies. This raw logic has governed conflicts from the smallest tribal disputes to the grand wars of nations. But scarcity is not only material. As humanity evolved, we began to fight not just for food or territory, but for psychological and symbolic resources. Honor, power, recognition, freedom. These too are scarce, for not all can hold power, not all can command respect, not all can dominate the narrative of history. And when such symbolic resources are threatened, the human psyche responds with the same primal urgency as if life itself were in danger. In this way, scarcity extends beyond the physical world into the realm of identity and meaning, fueling wars of ideology, religion, and culture. The tragic paradox is that scarcity often arises not only from actual limits, but from perception. Human beings fear loss, and this fear can create conflict even when resources are sufficient. Nations may go to war not because they lack, but because they anticipate lack, because they fear that others will take what they have or limit what they might acquire in the future. This anticipatory fear breeds preemptive aggression, and thus wars are fought, not only for what is, but for what might be lost. Scarcity reveals something essential about human psychology. We are not content merely to survive. We wish to secure survival indefinitely. We wish to ensure that no rival can threaten what we possess. This striving, while natural, generates endless competition. The psychology of war is, therefore, deeply tied to the psychology of fear: fear of loss, fear of deprivation, fear of vulnerability. When amplified collectively, this fear becomes a driving force of violence, legitimized in the name of protection or preservation. To understand war through scarcity is to recognize its roots in necessity, both real and imagined. Humans fight because they fear the void, whether the void of hunger, the void of insignificance, or the void of powerlessness. Scarcity awakens the deepest instincts within us, and until these instincts are understood, war will remain not merely possible but inevitable whenever human beings feel threatened by lack. If war were only about food, land, or water, it might be easier to resolve. But the psychology of war reveals that humans fight not just for survival, but for identity, meaning, and ideals. A human being does not live on bread alone. We live within stories, within symbols, within ideas that tell us who we are. When these are threatened, we react as if our very existence were under assault. Thus, the defense of an idea can summon the same ferocity as the defense of life itself. Nations and religions embody this truth most clearly. A flag is nothing more than fabric, yet people will die to protect it. A belief is intangible, yet wars are waged for centuries over it. Why? Because to the human psyche, these symbols are not external. They are extensions of the self. The tribe, the faith, the homeland, the way of life, all of these are woven into identity. When they are attacked, the individual feels attacked. When they are dishonored, the individual feels dishonored. The battlefield becomes a theater in which meaning itself is fought for, preserved, or destroyed. Psychologically, this reveals a profound vulnerability in human beings. Unlike animals, who fight almost exclusively for material survival, humans also fight for abstract constructs. Our capacity for imagination, for culture, and for transcendence makes us capable of both profound creativity and profound destruction. We create ideals that inspire love, loyalty, and sacrifice, but those same ideals can become causes for bloodshed when threatened. The very faculty that elevates us above mere survival also binds us to wars of meaning. This is why wars of ideology, religion, or honor are often more brutal and enduring than wars of scarcity. To fight over food or territory has limits. Once one side has enough, conflict can cease. But to fight over belief or identity knows no natural boundary because there is no enough. Ideas are not divisible. Two tribes can share a river, but they cannot both claim to hold the one absolute truth without conflict. This makes wars of meaning intractable because they are fought not for compromise but for recognition, for affirmation, for ultimate legitimacy. The danger here is that humans can become intoxicated by the defense of ideals. We can mistake our attachment to identity for the necessity of violence. When our sense of self is bound too tightly to nation, religion, or ideology, war becomes a way of asserting existence. To fight is to prove that we are. That our way of life has weight, that our narrative will not be erased. And so blood is spilled not for survival alone, but for the preservation of meaning. Understanding this truth sheds light on the depth of human conflict. We are not only physical beings, but symbolic beings. And therefore our wars reflect not only hunger and fear, but belief and imagination. Tragedy is that the very capacity to create meaning, which gives life richness, also makes us vulnerable to wars that cannot end as long as identity itself is perceived to be under siege. On the battlefield, something occurs that strips life down to its most essential elements. All the noise of ordinary existence, the trivial concerns, the endless distractions, the illusions of permanence, falls away. What remains are the raw truths: life, death, loyalty, fear, courage. War reduces existence to its fundamental polarities, and in this stark confrontation, many discover a paradoxical clarity and even purpose. This is one of the most unsettling aspects of the psychology of war. For some, battle offers a sense of meaning that daily life cannot provide. The ordinary world is often filled with ambiguity, confusion, and fragmentation. We are pulled in countless directions, our attention scattered, our identities fractured. But in war, the lines are drawn with brutal simplicity: friend or enemy, survival or death, advance or retreat. This clarity can feel intoxicating. It provides the individual with a sense of belonging to something larger, something absolute, even if that something is violent destruction. For the soldier, war can create a unity of body and mind rarely achieved in ordinary life. Every action, every instinct, every thought is directed toward survival and toward the collective mission. There is no room for the superficial, no tolerance for pretense. The individual becomes fused with the group with the cause with the necessity of action. In this totality, many experience what psychologists call flow, a state in which one is completely absorbed, wholly present, and profoundly alive. The paradox is that while war is chaos, for those immersed in it, war can feel like order. Life outside the battlefield often feels vague, purposeless, and fragmented. War, in its terrible way, concentrates existence into something immediate and absolute. Courage and fear are no longer abstract, they are lived. Loyalty is not theoretical. It is tested by whether you risk your life for another. Death is no longer an ideal. It is present in every moment, pressing upon every decision. This intensity of experience can be profoundly shaping, sometimes even addictive, because it reveals to the individual a mode of existence stripped of illusions. But the danger of this paradox is obvious. When meaning is found in war, peace can feel empty. Those who return from battle often struggle not only with trauma, but with a loss of clarity, a sense that ordinary life is shallow compared to the intensity of combat. In war, life was distilled to its essence. In peace, it is cluttered again with trivialities. The very clarity that war offers can become a trap, binding people psychologically to the battlefield even after they have left it. This insight shows us why war cannot be understood solely as destruction. It is also transformation. It strips humanity to its bones, forcing individuals to confront what it means to live and to die. And while this confrontation can yield trauma, it can also yield purpose. The paradox is that in the very heart of destruction, some discover what it means to truly exist. War exposes the dualities that lie at the very heart of human existence. It is not simply about armies clashing or territories being redrawn. It is the stage upon which the deepest contradictions of the human psyche are revealed. In war, aggression and cooperation coexist. Fear and courage battle within the same soul. The instinct to preserve life collides with the willingness to sacrifice it. These paradoxes are not accidents of war, they are its essence, for war forces us to confront what it means to be human in its most extreme form. Aggression, for example, is one of the oldest forces in human nature. It drives us to fight, to dominate, to destroy what threatens us. Yet in war, aggression alone cannot sustain an army. Soldiers must also cooperate, depend on one another, and risk their lives for their comrades. The battlefield, therefore, reveals that humans are both destroyers and collaborators. War thrives on both instincts, the drive to annihilate the enemy and the equally powerful drive to protect one's own group. It is the tension between these opposing forces that defines the psychology of conflict. Similarly, fear and courage do not exist as opposites in war, but as companions. A soldier who claims to feel no fear is either lying or has lost touch with his own humanity. Fear is natural in the face of danger. It sharpens the senses and keeps one alive. Yet courage arises not from the absence of fear, but from the decision to act in spite of it. In this sense, war demonstrates that fear and courage are not enemies but two halves of the same reality. Without fear, courage has no meaning. The paradox extends further still into the relationship between survival and transcendence. Every instinct in a human being screams for survival, yet countless soldiers throughout history have willingly faced death. Some sacrifice themselves for their comrades, others for ideals, others still for the hope of leaving behind a legacy. This reveals that human beings are not bound to the logic of mere survival. We are also creatures who seek transcendence. willing to give up life itself if it means affirming something greater. War brings these dualities into sharp relief because it strips away the inessential. In ordinary life, the contradictions of human nature remain hidden, covered by routine and distraction. But in war, they are thrust to the surface. The soldier discovers both the darkest violence within and the most profound loyalty, both the depth of fear and the height of courage, both the desperation to survive and the willingness to die. War becomes a crucible in which human nature is tested, revealed, and often permanently transformed. To understand this is to see that war is not only an external clash of weapons, but an internal drama of opposites. It reflects back to us the unresolved tensions of our own existence. We are creatures of contradiction, and in war, those contradictions are magnified until they can no longer be ignored. It is this inner duality, this simultaneous capacity for destruction and transcendence, that makes the psychology of war both tragic and deeply revealing. Violence in war is rarely just physical, it is also profoundly symbolic. To wage war is not only to kill or to conquer, it is to send a message, to impose a narrative, to declare that one's vision of the world must prevail over another. This is why war often continues even when its material goals, land, resources, security, could be resolved. At its core, war is about meaning, about whose story will dominate, whose truth will be recognized, and whose identity will endure. Throughout history, peoples and nations have gone to war not only to gain territory, but to defend honor, to avenge insults, or to preserve traditions. These motivations cannot be measured in material terms because they operate within the realm of symbols. A flag burned, a leader humiliated, a holy site desecrated. Such acts provoke wars because they are attacks on identity, and identity is something human beings hold sacred. We may tolerate hunger, but we rarely tolerate humiliation. The human psyche craves recognition, and when it is denied, conflict ignites. This symbolic nature of war is evident in the rituals that surround it. Victories are celebrated with monuments, parades, and stories passed down for generations. Defeats are remembered with grief, shame, or vows of vengeance. These rituals reveal that the battlefield is not just about who lives and who dies, but about who is remembered, who is honored, and who is erased. War is thus a struggle for historical memory, a contest over which narrative will shape the identity of future generations. Psychologically, this reflects a fundamental human truth. We do not merely want to survive, we want our existence to mean something. To die without recognition feels unbearable, while to die for a cause, whether for faith, nation, or honor, and feel redemptive. In this sense, war transforms the raw fact of death into a symbolic act. The fallen soldier becomes a hero, the lost battle a source of legend, the sacrifice a seed for future identity. War, in its symbolic dimension, provides a framework in which suffering and death are given meaning, however tragic or destructive that meaning may be. But this same symbolism also perpetuates war. Because conflicts are tied to identity and meaning, they resist resolution. You can divide land or share resources, but how can two groups both claim ultimate truth? How can two nations both hold the exclusive right to the same sacred story? When war is symbolic, compromise feels like betrayal, and peace can feel like dishonor. This is why some wars drag on for centuries, not because the material issues cannot be solved, but because the symbolic wounds cannot be healed. To see war as symbolic is to understand that it is not only fought on the battlefield, but also in memory, myth, and identity. It is fought in the stories we tell about ourselves and about others. The tragedy is that these stories, once stained with blood, are rarely forgotten. Instead, they are handed down, fueling new conflicts in the name of old wounds. In this way, the symbolic dimension of war ensures that its impact stretches far beyond the lives it consumes, shaping identities and destinies long after the guns have fallen silent. If we examine war not only as a clash of armies, but as a reflection of the human condition, we begin to see that its roots are not entirely external. War is born from within us, from the shadowed depths of the human psyche. Carl Jung once suggested that what we refuse to face in ourselves returns to us from the outside world, magnified and often destructive. War, then, can be understood as the collective shadow of humanity made visible, a projection of our inner conflicts onto the grand stage of history. Each human being carries within themselves aggression, fear, envy, pride, and the desire for domination. In ordinary life, these impulses are often hidden, suppressed, or rationalized away. But when these shadow elements are denied, they do not vanish, they accumulate. And when enough individuals share the same denials, the shadow becomes collective. Nations, like individuals, repress their violence, their greed, their unresolved conflicts, until eventually these denied forces erupt in the form of war. The battlefield becomes the mirror in which humanity is forced to confront what it has long tried to avoid. This is why war often feels both alien and familiar. We describe it as monstrous, as if it were an external force imposed upon us. Yet deep down we recognize something hauntingly human in it. The cruelty, the ambition, the desire to annihilate, these are not foreign to us. They belong to us. War externalizes them, making visible what we carry silently within. To admit this is uncomfortable, but without such recognition, we remain doomed to repeat the cycle, forever fighting enemies outside while blind to the enemies within. The psychology of war, then, demands an act of self-reflection. It asks us to see war not only as the failure of diplomacy or politics, but as the failure of individuals to face their own inner darkness. Just as personal healing requires integration of the shadow, acknowledging anger, fear, and desire rather than denying them, so too does collective peace require a reckoning with the parts of human nature we fear to admit. If nations, like individuals, continue to deny their aggression, they will continue to project it outward, and the battlefield will always await them. Yet within this grim truth lies the seed of hope. If war is the shadow of humanity, then its antidote lies in self-knowledge. To know ourselves fully, to accept both light and dark, is to disarm the inner battlefield that otherwise seeks expression in the outer world. Only by confronting the enemy within can we prevent the endless cycle of enemies without. Thus, war is not merely an event of politics or history. It is an expression of the unresolved depths of the human soul. And until humanity dares to look inward, to recognize and integrate its own shadow, the psychology of war will remain not a chapter of the past, but a prophecy of the future.